So, you want to own a Subway franchise. Sign the agreement, lease a storefront, hire a few sandwich artists, watch the lunch rush come in. Sounds like the safest small business on earth. The brand is global, the menu is fixed, the supply chain is built. The customers already know what they want before they walk in. But here's the strange part. Subway is the largest restaurant chain in the world by location count, and most of its franchisees earn less than a mid-level office worker. By the end of this video, you'll know how a Subway franchise actually makes money, why the cheapest franchise in fast food is also the hardest to profit from, why the corporation wins even when the franchisee loses, and why people keep signing up anyway. If you're going to follow the math all the way through this one, hit subscribe before you forget. It costs you nothing, and it keeps videos like this one coming. Subway franchises come in 3 sizes, and they're 3 completely different businesses. A small inline store in a strip mall in suburban America costs around $150,000 to $300,000 to open. For that money, you get a 600 to 1,500 square foot space, a counter, 2 ovens, a sandwich station, 3 to 6 employees, and a fan base of office workers and high school students who walk in at lunchtime because it's the closest option. Most of these stores are owned by first-time franchisees or immigrant families who run them as a livelihood. Profit is thin. Survival is the point. The owner works the counter, so the owner can keep the doors open. A non-traditional location is a different animal. Think a Subway inside a Walmart, a gas station, a university food court, a hospital, an airport terminal, an army base. The build-out cost runs $100,000 to $250,000, sometimes less if the host location handles the infrastructure. Walmart alone has hosted thousands of Subway locations over the years. A hospital Subway in a major metro can generate $800,000 to over $1 million in annual sales because the captive audience has nowhere else to walk to. And then there's the multi-unit operator, the franchisees who own 20, 50, or in some cases over 100 stores. People like the largest Subway franchisees in the United States, who operate as regional empires with their own back-office staff, their own area managers, and their own private payroll systems. These are not sandwich shops anymore. They are small logistics companies that happen to sell sandwiches. But the build-out cost is just the start. 2 more costs nobody warns you about. The first is the franchise fee structure. When you sign a Subway agreement, you pay an initial franchise fee of $15,000. That's the low number that gets used in every brochure, but that's only the entry ticket. After that, you pay 8% of gross sales every week as a royalty to the corporation, not net profit, gross sales. Then you pay another 4.5% of gross sales every week into the advertising fund. That's 12.5% off the top, before you've paid for a single tomato. McDonald's charges around 4% royalty. Burger King charges 4.5%. Subway charges nearly double, on stores that generate a fraction of the average McDonald's sales volume. The second cost is the food itself, which the franchisee does not really control. Subway franchisees buy almost all of their ingredients through a cooperative called the Independent Purchasing Cooperative. The bread, the meats, the cheeses, the vegetables, the packaging, all of it flows through approved distributors at prices the franchisee did not negotiate. When the corporation runs a promotion like the famous $5 footlong, which launched in 2008 and ran for years, the franchisees absorbed most of the margin compression. The corporation kept its 8% royalty on gross sales. The franchisee kept whatever was left after paying for bread that cost the same, whether the sandwich sold for $5 or $7. Then there's the lease. A Subway storefront in a decent retail location runs $3,000 to $8,000 a month in rent, often with annual escalators of 3 to 5% baked into the contract. The lease is usually signed by the franchisee, not the corporation, which means if the store fails, the corporation loses a royalty stream. The franchisee loses everything, including the personal guarantee they signed on the lease. Even the smallest franchise candidate understands what the corporation has built. Subway is a brand that prints royalty income, controls supply, and decides which menu items get promoted nationally. That's why the company can have over 36,000 locations worldwide and still grow franchisee numbers every year. There is always someone willing to sign. So you've got the store, you've got the franchise agreement, You've got the counter, the staff, the ovens, the lease. The customers are coming in. Now we get to the question that actually matters. Where does the money come from? The obvious answer is the sandwiches. Footlongs at the lunch rush, cookies at the register, drinks from the cooler, catering trays for office meetings. And all of that is true. But the obvious answer is also the wrong answer. The sandwiches are not the business. The sandwiches are the cover charge. The actual business is sitting in Milford, Connecticut, in a corporate office, calculating 12.5% of every transaction that happens in your store, whether you make a profit or not. Every Subway franchise on Earth earns money in 3 completely different categories, and the split is brutal in a way nobody explains to you before you sign. The industry calls them food cost, labor cost, and occupancy cost. Food cost is everything that goes into the sandwich, the bread, the proteins, the cheeses, the vegetables, the wrappers, the napkins. Labor cost is wages, payroll taxes, workers' compensation insurance. Occupancy cost is rent, utilities, equipment maintenance, point-of-sale fees. At a typical Subway, food cost runs around 30 to 35% of sales. Labor runs 25 to 30%. Occupancy runs 10 to 15%. Royalties and advertising fund payments take another 12.5%. The franchisee's slice of every dollar that walks through the door is, on a good day, around 10 cents. On a bad day, 0. Easiest way to picture it. Imagine a customer walks in and orders a footlong meal for $12.99. Of that, around $4.20 goes to food. Around $3.60 goes to labor. Around $1.60 goes to rent and utilities. $1.63 goes straight to the corporation as royalty and advertising fund. What's left for the franchisee before income tax is somewhere between $1 and $1.90 on a single sandwich, after paying everyone else first. Now multiply that by the average store. The numbers stop being theoretical. The average Subway franchise in the United States generates around $450,000 in annual sales. McDonald's, by comparison, averages over $3 million per location. A Chick-fil-A averages over $6 million. Subway has the lowest average unit volume of any major fast food brand in America by a wide margin. On $450,000 in sales, the franchisee takes home roughly $20,000 to $40,000 a year in actual personal income. That is not a typo. The average Subway franchisee in America earns less than a first-year teacher, often while working 60 to 70 hours a week behind the counter to keep labor costs down. Then there's the corporation side of the same transaction. Subway, the parent company, collects 8% royalty plus 4.5% advertising fund from every store, every week, regardless of whether the store made a profit. On $450,000 in sales, that's roughly $56,000 per store, per year, flowing to corporate. With over 20,000 stores in the United States alone, the math is staggering. The corporation does not need any individual store to be profitable. The corporation needs the store to be open. And here's the part that breaks people's brains. The longer you run the franchise, the more the math compresses. The industry calls it franchisee fatigue. Wages keep rising. Rent keeps escalating. Food costs keep climbing. But the corporation sets the menu prices nationally, and the franchisee cannot raise prices independently without approval. When the famous $5 footlong promotion was forced on franchisees year after year, thousands of operators complained publicly that they were losing money on every sandwich sold. The corporation kept its royalty. The franchisee kept the lease. So, now look at the architecture of the agreement. Read any Subway franchise disclosure document. Notice anything? The franchisee is responsible for the lease, the build-out, the equipment, the staff, the payroll taxes, the local marketing, and the personal guarantee. The corporation owns the brand, the menu, the supply chain approval list, and the right to terminate the agreement for a long list of contractual reasons. The industry has a term for this kind of structure: asymmetric risk. The franchisee carries almost all of it. The corporation carries almost none. The psychology of the franchisee is even sharper than the architecture. A first-time franchise buyer is a captive customer in a different sense than a restaurant diner. They have signed a 20-year agreement. They have personally guaranteed a lease. They have invested their savings, sometimes their family's savings, into a single storefront. They cannot walk away without losing everything. Which means when the corporation requires a remodel, the franchisee pays. When the corporation launches a new promotion, the franchisee absorbs the margin hit. When the corporation opens another Subway 4 blocks away, the franchisee swallows the encroachment. The data shows it. Subway has closed more than 7,000 stores in the United States since 2016, the largest contraction in fast food history. The franchisees who closed lost their entire investment. The corporation kept collecting royalties from the stores that survived. And at the very top of this pyramid sits the corporation itself. In 2024, Subway was sold to the private equity firm Rourke Capital in a deal valued at around $9.5 billion. That valuation was not built on selling sandwiches. It was built on the royalty stream from over 36,000 franchisees globally who pay 12.5% of gross sales every week forever, regardless of whether their individual stores make a profit. The franchisees are not the customers. The franchisees are the product. So here's the whole revenue model in one sentence. Royalty rate multiplied by store count, multiplied by store survival, multiplied by lease enforcement. And every single decision at corporate, from menu pricing to store location approval to remodel mandates, exists to maximize one of those 4 numbers. The sandwich is bait. The brand is the trap. The franchisee is the product. And the food, the thing most people think the business is built on, is just the cover story that keeps the royalty stream flowing. So, with all this guaranteed brand recognition, all this captive franchisee loyalty, all this engineered royalty income, why do Subway franchisees ever sign up at all? The short answer is the dream. Out of every dollar of Subway franchise revenue, an enormous portion is gone before the owner sees anything. A typical franchisee runs on a net margin so thin it often disappears entirely. Many Subway operators lose money for years and stay open only because closing means losing everything they have already invested. Where does it all go? About 30 to 35% of revenue at a typical store goes straight to food costs purchased through the approved supply chain. Another 25 to 30% goes to labor, which has only climbed as minimum wages rise across most states. Add 12.5% in royalty and advertising fund payments, paid weekly off gross sales regardless of profit. Add 10 to 15% in rent and utilities. Add credit card processing fees, point-of-sale system fees, uniform costs, training fees for every new manager, and the periodic remodel mandates that can cost the franchisee $50,000 to $150,000 out of pocket. Then there's the stuff most people never think about. Workers' compensation insurance runs $3,000 to $10,000 a year per store, more in states like California. General liability insurance climbs every year. Health inspections, fire inspections, ADA compliance audits. A single slip and fall lawsuit at a Subway has cost franchisees hundreds of thousands of dollars in settlement and legal fees. Equipment breaks, ovens fail, coolers stop cooling at 2 in the morning, and the franchisee is the one taking the call. Then there's encroachment. Subway is famous in the franchising world for opening new stores close to existing ones, splitting the same customer base across 2 locations, and cutting both stores' sales in half overnight. The guaranteed top line is real. Everything below it is a fistfight. That fistfight is where most Subway franchisees lose, and it has a small set of repeat patterns. Subway franchises can fail for a lot of reasons, but 2 mistakes show up over and over again. Mistake 1, buying an existing store at the wrong price. Resale Subway franchises are listed every day on broker websites at prices the seller wants, and the buyer hopes are justified. A store generating $400,000 in sales might be listed for $150,000. A first-time buyer sees a brand they recognize, runs the math optimistically, and assumes the previous owner was just inefficient. 2 years later, the new owner discovers the location was declining for a reason. The lease has a rent escalator they did not catch, and the staff turns over every 4 months. They lose their down payment, their working capital, and their personal guarantee on the lease. Don't buy a franchise on optimism. The numbers do not lie. The seller sometimes does. Mistake 2, Wrong location for the model. This one has killed thousands of stores. Subway expanded aggressively into small towns, gas stations, and secondary trade areas throughout the 2000s and 2010s, on the theory that any location with foot traffic could support a sandwich shop. It turned out that many of those locations could not. A Subway inside a small-town gas station might generate $200,000 in annual sales, which sounds fine until you do the math on food, labor, rent, and royalties. The store breaks even on a good month and loses money on a bad one. Between 2016 and 2023, Subway closed more than 7,000 locations in the United States alone. Most of those closures were franchisees who could not make the math work in a location the corporation had approved. Step back for a second. The economics of this industry are paradoxical. A Subway franchise has one of the most recognized brand names in food service. The supply chain is fully built. The menu is fully designed. The training is standardized. The marketing is national. And yet Subway franchisees earn less, on average, than the operators of almost any other major fast food brand. Why? Because the math only works for the corporation, not for the franchisee. The royalty rate is rigid. The supply chain pricing is rigid. The menu prices are set nationally, which means everything outside the math has to be perfect for the franchisee to come out ahead. Your location, your labor management, your lease terms, your timing relative to corporate promotions. Time to pull it all together and answer the actual question. How much money do you make if you do this right? 2 scenarios, real numbers. Scenario 1. A single Subway franchise in a suburban strip mall. $200,000 to open. Annual sales around $450,000. After food, labor, rent, royalties, advertising fund, and every other cost. Your real take-home is roughly $20,000 to $40,000 a year, assuming you also work behind the counter to keep labor costs down. Payback, 8 to 15 years, if you survive. Not glamorous, not really a business in the traditional sense. The most disciplined small operation you will ever run for the income of a part-time job. Scenario 2. A multi-unit operator running 50 stores across a region. $12 million in total investment, built up over 15 to 20 years. Combined annual sales around $22 million. And here's a fun fact most people miss. The economics only start working when you cross the threshold where you can hire area managers, centralize bookkeeping, negotiate group insurance, and pressure landlords across a portfolio. Net profit after everything, around $1 to $2 million a year, on a 30 to 40 hour work week for the owner. Payback, 10 to 15 years. Then you're earning a real income on a system you built one store at a time. And if you survive long enough, you become something specific. The largest Subway franchisees in the world operate hundreds of stores and run organizations that look more like regional food service companies than restaurant operators. Some have diversified into other brands, opening Dunkin' or Wingstop locations alongside their Subway portfolio, reducing their dependence on any single franchisor. The ones who built generational wealth in Subway did it by treating the brand as a logistics exercise, not a sandwich shop. So, if you do decide to own a Subway franchise, just remember the most important rule of this business. The brand is the bait, the royalty is the trap, the lease is the hook. Make sure you're not buying a sandwich shop. You're buying a 20-year contract that happens to sell sandwiches.